Good evening. Thank you for joining the City of Wilmington Commission on African American History as we continue our 6-month series on Emancipation Proclamation. Tonight's topic, historical trauma and the importance of literacy. We're excited for tonight's discussion and hope that those who are here and those who are watching will be filled with enriching information and dialogue. The purpose of our commission is to plan, develop, and implement community projects to recognize and increase the awareness of the contributions of African Americans to Wilmington's history, to encourage and assist African American history, to recognize sites in the community that are significant to African American history. I want to thank our commission liaison, Ms. Penelope Spicer Sidbury, city staff, and our Emancipation Subcommittee who organized this event and who organized community events to help keep our mission alive. But most importantly, I would like to thank our panelists and our audience for sacrificing a little of your time to support this wonderful event. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Today, we are here to celebrate literacy. Not only literacy, but historical literary societies, where intellect was honed in from the community and every aspect of literacy was appreciated. Today's topic, historical trauma and literacy, we want to know how to break the chain or break the cycle of trauma within our communities by understanding what we need to do as a community. We appreciate each of the professionals here today, and we hope that you enjoy this session. Thank you.
Good afternoon. We want to thank Chairman Evelyn Bryant and Ms. Kamika Sidbury, the subcommittee chair for the Emancipation Proclamation program series. We are so excited this afternoon. We want to thank each of you for being with us at home as well as in the room. At this time, Penelope Spicer Sidbury, I'm going to have the pleasure of introducing our panelists for this evening's discussion. Dr. Philip Brown, MD, labeled as a dent marker by his mentors and coaches. Dr. Philip Brown is known for creativity, disrupting organizations and systems. As a statewide leader guiding the vision and direction of healthcare through numerous roles with the North Carolina Medical Society, Dr. Brown influenced the organization to increase diversity in its leadership and include health equity as a guiding principle. Additionally, he established the Department of Health, Equity, and Human Experience as one of many areas under his oversight as Executive Vice President and Chief Physician Executive at New Hanover Regional Medical Center, where he served from 2016 to 2021. Dr. Brown received his MD from the Brody School of Medicine at East Carolina University in 1955 and has a BA in physical education from UNC Wilmington in 1988, where he graduated cum laude. He's licensed by the North Carolina Medical Board since 1998 and certified by the American Board of Surgery, both in general and vascular surgery. Dr. Brown completed his general surgery residency at the Brody School of Medicine in 2001 and was a fellow in vascular surgery with Johns Hopkins Hospital in 2001 to 2002. His scope of practice included 2 years in academic surgery, followed by 12 years in private practice before taking on full-time healthcare role in 2016. Dr. Brown is former president of North Carolina Medical Society. Following the Novant Health acquisition of New Hanover Regional Medical Center in 2021, he served for 18 months as Assistant Chief Community Impact Officer. He's a member of the Marshall Goldsmith 100 Coaches. Philip excels at helping develop inclusive, high-performing teams. Ladies and gentlemen, if you welcome Dr. Philip Brown.
Thank you.
Our second panelist is Ms. Daniela Williams, and we want to thank her because she kind of got a late notice about being one of our panelists, but she graciously accepted. Daniela is a native of Wilmington. She is a North Carolina licensed clinical mental health counselor and national board certified counselor. Daniela holds degrees from the University of North Carolina at Greensboro and Liberty University. She has over 17 years of experience working with children and adults in various capacities, from educational consulting, advocacy to community mental health. While Daniela's therapeutic interests are wide and varied, she has increased interest in the areas of infertility diagnosis, postpartum anxiety, depression, parental coaching, and marital and premarital counseling. She has a foundational approach rooted in rational emotive behavior therapy and motivational interviewing as modalities for change. As a staff member of the Community Counseling Center, Danielle has a perfect opportunity to connect her professional and personal mission to provide quality mental health care to the community and reduce the stigma of mental health care in her community. Ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Daniela Williams. Our next panelist is Mr. Brian Jones. Brian is a graduate of the illustrious North Carolina A&T University with a Bachelor of Science in Social Work degree. He has proudly worked as a social worker for New Hanover County Schools since 2001. As an educator, Brian was immediately appointed as an advisory to RACME. RACME stands for Region O, Council for the Advancement of Minorities in Engineering. And after some time as a board member and New Hanover County liaison, in 2012, he was nominated and selected as the New Hanover County Above and Beyond Employee of the Month for his commitment and success as an advisor and mentor to RACME students. Needless to say, he continued to influence students successfully through validation and mentoring all middle school, high school, and college students who requested insight and assistance. Additionally, other appointments include New Hanover County Strategic Planning Committee, Dropout Prevention Committee, and currently New Hanover County Equity Work Group. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Brian Jones. And our final panelist is Ms. Essence James. Essence was born and raised in Wilmington, North Carolina. She attended Gregory Elementary School, Williston Middle School, and New Hanover High School. Upon graduation, she attended the illustrious North Carolina Central University and graduated with a bachelor's for social work degree. Essence plans to receive her master's in social work at the University of North Carolina at Wilmington. Essence is currently employed at the Coastal Horizon Incorporated as an intensive family preservationist specialist, working to preserve the homes of many families. Essence has a beautiful 5-year-old daughter and loves to travel and spend time with her family. Essence is also proud to be a member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. Ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Essence James. And as we all get comfortable, my panelists, is there anything we can get you before we get started? We're good. So you all were sent the questions in advance. Ms. Sidbury is going to come back to the podium and ask each of you the same questions. You all will answer those questions, and at the end, we will circle back to get a conclusion from each of you on your thoughts and that sort of thing to kind of share, and then we'll wrap it up. Thank you.
So everyone will have the opportunity to go first, second, third, and last. So the order will not be the same each time. Now, I'm gonna decide where we start from, but everyone will have the opportunity. And so if you need clarification on the question, or we need to kind of rephrase it, or if you have rephrased it already, that is okay. So this is a panel discussion, getting your insight on things that we can do to be better. Does everybody understand? Just answer with your heart and not necessarily with your brain, but give your brain insight. All right, so Ms. James, number one, why is healthcare literacy important to the community when addressing trauma and mental wellness?
So I think healthcare literacy is important because individuals seek help and services from professionals, and professionals tend to use large words. So I feel like when it comes to literacy as professionals, we have to do better with using clear and understanding information to make sure our clients understand, or the individuals that we're working with understand. I feel like a lot of individuals who seek professional help don't do research to just take the professional's word for granted. So because these individuals are entrusting us with this information, we got to do better with with making it clear on the services we're providing, why we're providing it, and the treatment that comes with it.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Jones, why is healthcare literacy important to the community when addressing trauma and mental wellness?
For one, I feel like that's such a loaded question. And thank you for sending that question and for having myself and everyone else. I have a little difficulty with that question because I'm trying to figure out if we're talking about the patient or the provider. So I think it actually is needed for both. And we'll start with the provider. What Ms. James has already referred to is having a little bit more insight and education, because when it boils down to it, when we're talking about diverse cultures, we need to understand that diversity goes beyond ethnicity. It reaches to socioeconomics, it reaches to regions of whether a city or larger. So having said all that, in my experience as a member of the community, when entering the medical field, when you meet someone from a university that is great, but their exposure to the entire nation, to people from different communities, if they don't have that experience, it doesn't matter how intelligent they are, they can't serve them because they misdiagnose. They don't always understand that anxiety from one community may look completely different from someone else. PTSD from most people, when they think of PTSD, do not think of the military. But what about PTSD from growing up in a community where you lack resources, or there's an overabundance of violence, and so forth and so forth. So I haven't said that. And then I think of that question for the person. I think of that for the person who is being treated, like Essence has said, and Essence, whose background was also in the school system. When people don't know what the acronyms stand for, when they don't know what a lot of the words stand for, which I will say from experience, having spoken when my mother went through breast cancer, having to talk with the insurance company, I had to ask the question when they read a clause, what is it called, a clause of the policy to me. I said, with all due respect, I don't have a degree in law, but and I don't know if you do, but I'm not going to assume. Can you tell me what that means? They hung up the phone on me, by the way, and my mother, and she refused to call them back. She wanted her baby to stay free. So having said all that, when it comes to literacy, there's so many layers to it. And if we're not all talking on the same level, if we're not understanding one another, then how is something being treated correctly, diagnosed correctly? And how are we going to have any results? And to have a quick fix, unfortunately, many people have died from having quick fixes or not having a sufficient or proficient response.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Williams, Mrs. Williams, why is healthcare literacy important to the community when addressing trauma and mental wellness?
Well, I think healthcare literacy is just as important as all literacy. If you can't read, if you don't understand, then you have no way of interpreting and synthesizing information. That goes with healthcare, that goes with the provider and the client or patient. Having a navigator, having someone who's able to do that for you is going to be essential to receiving appropriate and effective healthcare. Particularly as a client, if you have certain members of your community who are acting out in a certain way or behaving in a certain way, you will get a diagnosis that looks like something but isn't the same thing. For example, a lot of Black men in the 60s and 70s were getting diagnosed with schizophrenia, when in reality their reaction to the systematic oppression was normal. It was anxiety, it was depression, and they were acting out and angry, but it was schizophrenia according to the book because, oh, somebody's watching me. Yes, people were watching you, contra intra pro, but you're thinking no one's watching you. Or if you're seeing people in a church shouting and they're like, God told me. If you don't have that cultural background, you're going to say, oh, they're having delusions, auditory hallucinations. So you have to be competent clinicians and providers, and you also have to be competent patients. You can't just take someone's word for it without advocating for yourself. So that's the importance, because if you go into trauma, my trauma response is going to be different from your trauma response. But if we know what the trauma response is, then you can say, is it fight, flight, or freeze? It's going to be one same physiological reaction, but it's going to produce itself differently.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Dr. Brown.
Well,
Same question. I'm
sure.
sorry, I guess I could
You-
need to ask a question again. Give me a minute.
Yeah.
Why
Up
is
to you.
healthcare literacy important to the community when addressing trauma and mental wellness?
I mean, just to build on
Mhm.
what Ms. Williams and Mr. Jones just started, I would talk a little bit about the two-sided nature of literacy, right? And it really comes down to how do you create effective communication between provider and patient or client or whatever the case may be. It is so important that that communication starts out on the right foot, because when you start talking about treatment of trauma and how you get into a mental wellness space, there's no way to get there if you don't have trust with the person who's trying to help you get there. And the only way to have that trust is if you really understand one another. And so many times what we've seen in the health system is there's a little bit of a baseline level of trust, perhaps for a doctor or another medical professional. And so it's almost a little bit of an open door. But if there's a failure of listening, if there's a failure of empathy that's caused by a communication problem, which a lot of times is from speaking a different language or sharing different experiences in different ways, goes back to the literacy component of health and healthcare, then that door closes really quickly. And the opportunity to move somebody to a healthier space is gone behind the door. And so I think that's really the value of building health literacy. It's really about building a common language. And when you advance beyond even healthcare literacy, really to what I think is higher level, which is health literacy, then it's even more important to start with that common language.
All right, thank you, Dr. Brown. All right, now we're gonna start with Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones, do you personally or professionally believe Black citizens are taught to be too resilient? Explain your reasoning.
Are they taught to be too resilient?
Mhm.
Not sure why you chose me to start off on that
I
question.
told you what-
Personal, you. Um, personally speaking, and I want to reiterate, personally speaking,
I said
as-
personally and professional.
yes, but we'll get to the professional. Personally speaking, being that I did grow up in Wilmington, I don't think we have been taught as we used to be taught. I don't think it's pushed as much as it used to. There's quite a few people in here. I know you all from one form or another. There's someone here who knows my mother very well. And personally speaking, I felt like as a community, we were encouraged and taught more at one point in time from that one pillar of the community, that being the church. And the information constantly came across that microphone, that pulpit, and into that audience. And it was the way that the majority of the community received information. I don't see that message as strong as it used to be. I'm not saying there's not positive messages going on, but our society has become more complex in many ways. And I don't think the message has kept up. Now, I'm saying this also as an ordained minister. There's better treatments, there's updated treatments. I think we would all agree. So at this point in time, at one point in time where you could not trust the medical field has expanded. For example, there's more holistic approaches. So at one point in time, people weren't encouraged to have surgery if they had cancer and so forth and so forth. I mean, we can go on with examples, but having said all that, when it comes to, are we being taught to be too vigilant? I mean, too
Resilient.
resilient. What resilient was for us, I have to explain to other professionals, other people translate that as us being superstitious. What we consider being wise, they consider holding on to the past, not understanding that there's always a risk of there being a misunderstanding, a miscommunication, or mistreatment, if not malpractice. So having said that, I don't think we talk about it enough. Now, as a professional, I see it, but I see it for many different reasons. But if we want to speak to when it comes to African Americans, I've been contacted by, I'm not speaking on behalf of the school system, but I'm speaking because of my professional background. I've been contacted by many parents, people from the community, and they don't know their rights. And when I inform them of things like a medical social worker, they've never heard of these terms. So are we being too resilient? No, we're not being resilient enough, because there's more resources, there's more information out there, there's more organizations that can help us. But yet, as a whole, if you were to poll our community, we're not aware of that.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. All right, Ms. Williams, do you personally or professionally believe Black citizens are taught to be too resilient? Explain your reasoning.
So my reasons personally and professionally are one and the same. I do think that Black people have been taught to be too resilient, and particularly Black women with the strong Black woman motif has been that we've been taught that get over it, go through it, it's going to be okay, don't worry about it, you're stronger than that. I can remember growing up, first grade, kindergarten, you have to be twice as good. You have to be 3 times as good because you're a woman and you're Black and you're a girl. You have to perform at a level. You have to be resilient. So we have to look at the baseline of the definition of resilience. That means to bounce back from trouble. We constantly bounce back from trouble. That's been the trauma that we had to forget about what happened, move forward. We can't continue to forget about what happened, because if we do, then we're continually we're having PTSD focus in our get kind of technical in our amygdala. We're experiencing that same trauma that's in our DNA now, instead of processing it because we're told to get over it. You can't get over that. You have to go through that. And if we're not, we don't have that same setup of resiliency that was built within the church, because it can be protective. But if you don't have that place to process, that place to collaborate, that place to see yourself in a different light, then you don't get over it, and you're too resilient, and you become independent and depressed and anxiety, and you're always on medication. So it just kind of goes, and your system is activated, and then you act out. So what you're seeing in our world today is the fact of people not having community, not being able to communicate with each other and go through things. We're told to get over it over and over. So yes, Black people have been told to be too resilient, particularly Black women. And our medical rates are showing that breast cancer, thyroid disease, hypertension, diabetes, all diseases of inflammation caused by overactive system.
Amen. That was good.
I'm not messing with you. Thank you so much, Ms. Williams. Dr. Brown, do you personally or professionally believe Black citizens are taught to be too resilient? Explain your reasoning.
I really like the question that Ms. Williams asked about the definition, the exact definition, right? And I think that helps in the context that you're talking about the ability to respond to stress. In general, more resilience is good. But like you were saying just earlier, is that what we're really seeing, I think, or I'll say it maybe less eloquently, more dumbed down, is that we're seeing people be asked to behave beyond the bounds of resilience. And that's a fundamentally different thing, right? Like there is nothing in the universe that can't be broken, right? Like we can break up atoms now, right?
Okay.
Like they got these facilities that crash them into each other. And so anything can be broken. And so if we ask too much, if a system asks too much of individuals, or particularly of groups of individuals, then a lot of times what we see is we perpetuate this traumatic cycle. Because I really love the way, I feel like I'm plagiarizing you a little bit. I love the way you put it, about you got to process it and you got to be in it. And you have to acknowledge the reality that is, and not just by yourself. The system, the surrounding, the support structures have to acknowledge the reality that has been, and it's only beyond that process that you can then begin to create alternative realities, which are more favorable. And so what we build into a system when we ask someone to go beyond the bounds of resilience, which is clearly how I'm going to answer your question now, is that really we're asking people to go beyond the bounds of resilience. We see it in the statistics, whether it's maternal outcomes, whether it is any health outcome, whether it's educational outcomes, economic outcomes, it's across the entire spectrum of our entire society. But when you do that, basically you're setting up a person to where it's almost impossible to set up an alternative reality because everything that they've experienced, everything that they're seeing is coming in a way that's basically unsolvable. And so the entire mindset and mental chatter is going towards the problems instead of the alternatives. And that's when folks get stuck. And again, going back to the other question, until you can then acknowledge, get a baseline, and have enough trusting individuals to work through that, it's pretty likely that a person would remain stuck in that traumatic experience and also continue to experience it over and over again.
All right, thank you, Dr. Brown. Now, Miss James.
So when I read the question, I immediately thought about like resiliency and African-American families reaching out to receive assistance and support from different resources in the community. And so I feel like personally and professionally, yes, we're taught to be too resilient. We hear things in the Black families like, we'll figure it out. What happens in this house stays in this house. So I think we as a community are kind of afraid to reach out for help because of trauma and things that have happened to other families from reaching out to for help. I feel like the system has failed families before, and so that causes a barrier in families reaching out for assistance. So I feel like as professionals, we have to do better with building rapport with families and relating to families so that we can build that trust with them again.
Thank you. All right. Question number 3. Ready, Ms. Williams?
Hot seat.
Okay, so I might have to read this and then come back and correct what I read. So
Okay.
give me a minute. Okay, so I'm gonna cut this question off a little bit because I think I might have been late. How can we, as a community, combat the criminalization and stigma of mental health patients? So the question is asking the stigma behind getting treated for mental health within our community. So within the Black community. So how can we, as a community, combat the criminalization and stigma of the treatment of mental health patients in order to decrease one's willingness to seek support and care? So that's the entire question. So that's why I was like, let me try to cut this one down. But you get the gist. So because it's part of your profession.
Oh, is it? Okay. All right. So when I read that question, I thought about it. Like you just took a moment. I was like, yeah, it was late. So it's 3 parts to this question. The first part about the criminalization of mental health, it should be criminalized. The community can't do anything that's legislative, that is voting and getting the right people in office who understand what's happening in our communities. You wouldn't criminalize someone with diabetes if they went out and they got in a car accident because their blood sugar is low. Why are we criminalizing someone who forgot to take their medication, who's schizophrenic? Why are we criminalizing somebody who's manic? We have to understand, we have to improve health literacy outcomes across the board. So that's the first part. The second part, you got to remind me of the second part again.
So the second part was the stigma of treatment.
So the stigma of treatment, that's a historical component that is kind of hard to dig into. The first part of that is, and not to kind of point fingers at you guys, but you, as social workers, the original, how people originally saw social workers in our community, oh, they're going to take my kids. So you think of therapy, social worker, and if I say this, they're going to take my kids. So, but that's not always true. There are different types of social workers, there are medical social workers, there are LCSWs who are clinical social workers, and then there are social workers who do work in child protective services and adult protective services. Not everyone's coming to take the kids. First of all, we want to make sure that families are united, and because that's the safest and best route for the child. But there are other professions as well. So you have psychologists, you have psychiatrists, you have licensed clinical mental health counselors such as myself, you have marriage and family therapists as well, who can help treat these illnesses that we deal with. Not everything requires medication, not everything requires to be drugged up, because that's one of the things around the 80s and 90s when we're having kids who, oh, that kid has ADHD. And it's like, why is there a big influx of kids with ADHD? There's not. ADHD has been around since the 1800s. They were called different things at that point. It was called, it was a funny name, I can't remember, but it was like hyperactivity in youth or juvenile delinquents or something like that, because they were impulsive. They started treating it with stimulants in the 70s. So it's not just this new thing. Stimulants work and they help, but all we saw, because it was newer for children, we saw these high doses and we saw our kids kind of zombied out. That at appropriate doses, it does not do those things to children, and it helps that child learn, it helps that child grow, it helps adults learn, it helps adults grow. And we have to realize it's not this, it's not that, and we can't keep our minds blinded and saying, well, oh, you're on Prozac, something's wrong with you. We have to have conversations. We have to improve health literacy to know that nothing's wrong with you. It's a systematic body function. Your serotonin is low, or your norepinephrine is off, or your dopamine is off. Even if you're an addict, you're chasing dopamine. What does that mean? The same person who wants to eat constantly is doing the same thing that the person who wants to use heroin is doing. You're chasing a dopamine cycle. So we have to improve literacy in order to improve health outcomes in that. And there was another part of your question.
Just how to, you really answered the question.
Okay.
So how to increase one's willingness to seek support and care. And you went back to improving literacy and having those conversations. So you're done.
Okay.
All right, so Dr. Brown, I'm coming to you with this loaded question.
Yeah,
All right.
all right.
How do we, so do you want me to break it? You want to break it down?
No, it's okay. I'll
Okay.
take a stab at it.
All right, so how can we as a community combat the criminalization and the stigma of treatment of mental health patients in order to increase, because I think on the question it says decrease, in order to increase one's willingness to seek support and care?
The short answer
Mhm.
is that as a community, we have to begin to talk about these things as the illnesses that they are. I mean, that's the short answer.
Mhm.
The longer answer, again, I love the tie to literacy. And in this case, I think when you're talking about criminalization and stigma, it's two different kinds of literacy.
Mhm.
And it's the same two kinds we talked about before. So the criminalization part of it is system officials being illiterate about what it really is and creating policies that are not right. One of the features of our society that we've battled our entire history that leads to profound injustices is the need to make things somebody's fault. Plain and simple. And we have created basically a caste system that makes it more likely that we make it a certain type of person's fault than it is another type of person's fault. Those are things that we got to work through as a society, but we can't put policies in that are punitive of illness, right? It's like, I love the diabetic analogy and take it even farther. We wouldn't incarcerate a diabetic because their sugar got out of control and they lost their leg. I mean, we wouldn't do that. So it really is, there's an educational component uh, to policymakers, to policy enforcers, to the judicial system. And I know that that is actually underway and we see progress, but it's slow, but there is progress that's being made in that space. We need it to be faster. And so as a community, that activism to continue to talk about these things, bring them to the forefront, ask the tough questions, I think is extremely helpful. Now, in terms of the stigma piece, that is a literacy on the other side of the coin, which is really the person who's affected by the illness needs to be able to believe that it's okay to get help, which means they kind of need to know what the options are. And they probably need help navigating how to get help, because that's really a lot of times it's tricky when, help is available and you got a helper and then you got a patient, but you can't get them connected.
Yeah.
And so that literacy piece of pragmatically, how do I access this without being embarrassed, without, bringing some type of reputational adversity on my family or who I'm in contact with. That's a big part of it.
Yeah.
But that also gets helped by talking about it, right? Like, mental illness is illness, we got to basically put the head back on the body when we talk about illness, because it's all one thing.
All right. You ready, Ms. James?
Yes.
So how can we, as a community, combat decriminalization and stigma of the treatment of mental health patients in order to increase one's willingness to seek support and care?
So I agree with Dr. Brown and Ms. Williams. And I think that from working at Coastal Horizons is trying to tackle it a little bit. They have programs where they go in the jails and support people with substance abuse problems, mental health problems. So I think Coastal Horizons has kind of got a head start on that. But we need more organizations like that in the community because it's a lot of people. So Coastal Horizons can't help everyone. So we need more. But as far as the stigma, I think that social media has impacted that a lot. And there's a lot more Black professionals entering the field. And so I think that helps a little bit as well, because we use social media and we use that as a huge platform to advocate and bring people in like that. But I feel like we just got to continue to spread awareness if we want people to seek help, and we got to share our experiences as well, because a lot of people don't believe that treatment helps. So we got to figure out how to put a twist to that and make it more appealing for people to want to seek the help and care that they need.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. James. All right, Mr. Jones.
Do I get the question again?
Yeah, I'm not
No.
being respectful. Yeah. Sorry.
No, I have
Are
a
you
question.
sure?
It's just loaded for me, and I appreciate what everyone has said. I just want to do the question justice because also from my personal experience, I did therapeutic foster care,
Mhm.
and I often say that it made me a better school social worker. But school social worker made me a better therapeutic foster parent. Having said all that, when you talk about the criminalization, I love when I saw the question. I remember when this conversation was more national and on the news, and one of the first things they wanted done was for the dispatchers to be able to dispatch who would be the correct person to respond. And then we've had the conversation about first responders when it comes to criminalization. But the reality is, there was some progression with that. I agree with Dr. Brown. Better get the name right. I'm sorry, Dr. Brown. But there was progression, but then I feel like there was a little digression. People dialed things back. One of the things that you see when you pass people who are homeless, when you come in contact with people, whether phone calls from my job or whatever the case may be, a lot of times people don't understand what they're coming in contact with. And I'm glad somebody mentioned diabetes. I know on so many occasions, on personal levels, on professional levels, where people assume that someone is either drunk or high or even just lazy and they sleep all the time, not knowing that they have problems regulating their blood sugar. So it's not just first responders, it's all professionals, know what you're dealing with. If I was a banker, am I going to mistreat the person who just came? Is there, so the literacy is necessary, but I just want to point that out. There is so many medical issues that people have a tendency to, out of their arrogance, out of their experience, out of even their status of professionalism, to just misdiagnose. But never mind all that. Want to point it out, but also because I am ordained minister, when it comes to the stigma of mental health, again, I want to speak to the church. When I release my book, shameless plug, whenever I release my book one day, I would like to point out how we always talk about mental illness, as we should, but you rarely hear people say mental wellness. I mean, you do, but you don't. You say mental health. But my personal experience is there are so many scriptures that tell you go talk to someone. Go talk. I'm not going to take you to church, but there's so many scriptures that tells you how to meditate, how to process. And I like what my sister said when she says, but people are being told to be strong. Well, there's a scripture that tells you too, you can't be strong without support. You can't be strong without a brother or sister. So again, if we could reduce the arrogance of people and understand we are human, you have got to, superhuman you may be for a moment, but even Clark Kent had to switch back into everyday clothes. We just have to remember that. And so I don't want to prolong that, but I also would like to say again, I like what Dr. Brown said. He opened the door. I'm still trying to figure out how to get back to that word navigation, because that's my word other times, but she took it. But are we dealing with progression? Are we dealing with digression? Are we dealing with regression? And I would dare say, I think we're dealing with all of them. It just depends. We have progressed as a society. We have progressed in the field of mental health, but make too many strides. And at some point in time, because of what Dr. Brown referred to, because of politics, because of economics, you've got to dial it back. And so in order to combat it, all of that information has to be exposed. And I know there's somebody sitting here that knows very well about exposing things when it comes to how people have been treated.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. You know, I was about to say Brother Jones. All right, Dr. Brown, you're gonna start our last question, and then we're gonna have a kind of like an open discussion, like where you can talk about some other things. All right, so what resources do you suggest to the community, either for individuals or collective groups, to start or advance their healing journey?
I would come back to what Mr. Jones was talking about in terms of an individual has little chance to make it on their own. And from where I sit, what I believe is important is a community. I think it starts with a community of believers, and maybe that's a faith-based organization. Maybe that's one of various different support type organizations, or even a social group can serve that function. And then it really becomes about trust and transparency and understanding one another better. And the journey can only be made one step at a time. And every step won't be forward for sure. But if we stick at it together, and then if we figure out how to connect the communities that are working on it with the various individuals in meaningful ways, then I think that's when we see progress come faster. When we remain isolated or disconnected, we see reversion, or we see progress cease. And so really it's about more connection, whether individual to community or communities together, to address and talk about the difficult problems in a very forthright, curious manner, because these problems are complex.
Mhm.
I mean, if there was an easy fix, it would have been deployed a long time ago. So we got to be humble. We got to be curious. We got to listen really well. And then we got to try some things to support one another, because we're only one group. It's the human race, and our mutual existence is so linked together. It can't be any other way. And groups can't be left behind, however you want to define groups, in any element of diversity you want to select. You have to kind of keep the whole thing moving together, and that's how you get progress.
All right, Ms. James, thank you, Dr. Brown.
I think I want to piggyback off of Dr. Brown when he said creating access. I think we have to do better at creating access and also, provide programs where we can take individuals' hands and walk them step by step, because I think a lot of times, you go to a therapist's office and you got to fill out this packet. That is discouraging, honestly. So if you have somebody there to support you and walk you through that, it makes it a little bit easier. So I think continuing to have programs like this and educating the community and coming together to try to figure out the best way to support the community and build that trust between the professionals and the community as well.
All right, thank you, Ms. James. Mr. Jones?
I want to do the question justice. Can you repeat the question?
Yes, I
Because
apologize.
I think Ms. James took my answer.
What resources do you suggest to the community, either for individuals or collective groups, to start or advance their healing journey?
I'm a little biased, as I shouldn't be. However, I still, the one resource I want to see the churches, all together. We just came through COVID. The numbers are there. There are not as many people in attendance, but the need is still there for inspiration. The need is still there for healing. The need is still there for community. So having said all that, I would love to see our churches do what many have already done, but I would like to see us expand it and come together.
All right. Mr. Jones, are you done?
Yeah, I would like to see our churches. I really would. I would like to see us. I would like to see us even do some. Do y'all remember we used to have career fairs at one particular church, health fairs at another? I would like to see a committee.
Vacation Bible School at all the churches, so
well,
you
here
go
we
to
go.
everyone every.
Yes, ma'am. Which for the summer gave some kids a positive place to be.
Got lunch?
In evening, it gave them food and nutrition.
Trip at the end of the
Yes,
day.
yes, I would like to see us return to some old things that we used to do and understand that maybe if we would understand that recruitment, in my opinion, if I was to start a church tomorrow, I'm not saying I would, however, I would expect you there, Sister Sidbury. But if I was to start a church, I would have to understand that recruitment is not about who's just there on Sunday. It would be really, who am I serving? How is that helping? And to be honest, if I had to have bragging rights, I can go say to Miss Williams, yeah, they don't come to church, but they do come to book club. They do come, I'm still impacting the community. I would like for people to have a broader scope of what service looks like, a broader scope of what impact looks like.
Yes, I will be there in Zoom
Okay,
every
thank
Sunday.
All right.
Ms. Williams, would you like me to repeat the question?
Yes, please.
All right, what resources do you suggest, not to me, to the community, either for individuals or collective groups, to start or advance their healing journey?
One of the major things that stands out when I think about this question is the fact that, and it may not seem connected, but it'll come together, is that the fact that the CDC recommends, the number one thing that they recommend for the prevention of suicide is connection.
Mm.
And they say so in a couple of ways, the larger community, within the family, and within smaller communities. So they have concentric circles kind of getting bigger. All of those things have gone away from us for the most part, and we have to restructure those. So yes, the church, it clearly mentions that in the CDC recommendations and literature. Citywide things like having those recreational centers open, having those programs available that with minimum obstacles for someone to join. I shouldn't have to sign a link and do all this. I should be able to go into the building and be able to participate.
Mhm.
Having structures that are supportive of youth, of families, so that people can make it home to dinner. That's the other thing. Having family dinners is a protective thing, a protective factor that increases your mental wellness. It's all about connection. The research all points to that. So church, friend groups, family, those things are the number one predictive of health in children. And it's when we talk about ACEs all the time, adverse childhood events. A child who's experienced any number of ACEs, 2 and above, if they have one caring adult, you can take away the impact of that ACE on that child. Connection is the only way to prevent and to cure mental wellness. The first thing I tell a patient who has depression or anxiety, the first thing I say is call a friend. When's the last time you talked with a friend? Because when the thing you'll hear them say, I haven't been with my friends. I've socially isolated. Go outside, get vitamin D, and go hang with a friend. Do that for 2 weeks, and you probably won't need medication. So go outside and hang with friends. It's the number one way to prevent it.
I wrote that down too.
You better do it.
All right, so you guys, does anyone, so we're gonna go back to you, Ms. James. Is there, no, just anything that you felt like you maybe wanted to discuss that you didn't have a chance to?
No, I just feel like I think that us younger professionals coming in are making a huge impact, and we're pushing therapy, we're pushing treatment. Like, I know growing up, I didn't hear about treatment much. So I think we're doing a good job with using social media and just using our platforms and our voice to encourage our peers and even older individuals to seek treatment and seek help. So yeah, I want to just continue to encourage our young professionals to follow your dreams, go to school, and advocate for your community, advocate for yourself. And I think we'll see a difference.
All right, thank you, Ms. James. All right, Mr. Jones.
Okay, us older professionals.
Look. Cause I was like.
Yes, she did. Yes, she did.
I know, this was great.
So I'm gonna steal the answer, and I'm gonna stay in line with what my sister said, who I did enjoy working with, but she made some good points. The older professionals, we've got to utilize what's out here now, social media. We've got to utilize, I mean, there's a lot of things we can do. One of the things that she pointed out was what is very discouraging, and that is the paperwork. Sometimes there's a way to get clients in the door, whether it be social media or not. Some of those things, if we can get past, what's it called? For anybody who ever worked in retail, for anybody who ever worked in a grocery store, you have to scan certain items per minute. In retail, you have to sell certain things per hour. It's like that sometimes with the medical professional. I only have 15 minutes because I got to mass produce this. But if that time can be used to make the correct assessments, having a conversation for someone who maybe has not been to the doctor in a while, that can be taken care of with the nurse, whoever the case may be. Those models would be big. But back to the social media part, we've got to use social media to pull people in. And when it comes to the way that our tax dollars are being spent, we have people, entertainers, we have people who talk about mental health. And if I'm gonna go there again, if church is not the influence when it comes to the African-American community and its entertainment, do we not have people who represent the community, who represent humanity, who represent America? Call them in and let them talk about their issues. I'm trying to remember, who's the grandmother on Blackish? Anybody help me? Somebody help me. She is big
Oh,
about
Jennifer,
Jennifer
Lewis. that's
Lewis.
what it-
She is big on talking about mental health. For those of y'all who will be, say again? Taraji P. Henson, and I hate to go way back there, but Dream Girls, for those of us who are older, for Dream Girls, Jennifer, not Jennifer Hudson. Who sung the song I'm telling you?
Jennifer Hudson.
No, the one.
Oh, the first one.
Holiday, Jennifer Holiday. They are big. See, you told us. I'm telling myself, yeah. We've got to utilize what we have. We've got to utilize what we have people who have been through the experience, and we need to call them to the stage, put them on Zoom. We can't afford to get people in. We can't put them on Zoom and let them tell the message, but we've got to use what we have now in order to connect, as my sister said, in order to help people not be isolated.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Mrs. Williams, would you like to add more that you felt like you didn't get a chance to talk about for this discussion?
I guess, and we talked about most of the things. I'll be remiss to not to mention last week was Black Maternal Mental Health Week.
Mhm.
And just the fact that Black women are dying at an absorbent amount, I'm using the wrong word, at an increased rate just by having a baby. Not just Black women, but all women in the United States are dying. And it's ridiculous that simple care of not sending them home 2 days after labor could save someone. And it doesn't matter your economic status. It doesn't matter what insurance you have. Serena Williams was almost killed because no one would pay attention to the fact that she said, I'm in pain. I could have been killed because I said my blood pressure is high. And they're like, well, it's within normal range. No, my blood pressure runs 120 over 70, not 130. Something is wrong. Well, it looks normal. Get my doctor in here. If I didn't have the audacity to request and demand help because you made an assumption that I didn't have insurance and you sent a intern in. It doesn't matter if I had Medicaid, if it doesn't matter if I had Medicare, send in a proper person that can diagnose me properly. Because I could have died. My friends could have died. There are people who have died over simple things because you're making assumptions. And even, I'm not sure if there's a lot of talk where it says about 30% or 40% of the medical professionals, even in Wilmington, believe that Black people don't feel pain as much as white people. That's a woman study about our doctors here.
Wow.
That they don't believe we feel pain. The fact that gynecology was formulated on Black women with no anesthesia, that's a problem. And you're still doing these things. You're still having women getting IUDs who are still getting biopsies with no medication, no sterilization. Oh, there should be a little cramping. You're taking a piece of somebody's organ. You're taking an organ. That's is inhumane, the way the women are treated in our country. That's my piece. Had nothing to do with, well, it does.
Yes.
That's my,
But
that's
no,
my soapbox.
but no, I appreciate you. All right, thank you, Ms. Williams. Dr. Brown?
She's exactly right,
Mhm.
to be honest, and there are deep, deep historic roots of how that is, and the fact that we haven't made more progress in that particular realm is almost unfathomable, but that's very true. And we do know that the maternal outcomes in this country for all women are on the decline. And with that said, there's also a profound disparity in outcomes between white and Black women. Those are things that have no scientific basis. And when you look at where we have come from a technological standpoint in medicine, it's just unbelievable. And we can definitely do better. It goes very upstream from the moments of care during the labor process. It goes all the way back to prenatal care. It goes back to health literacy. It goes many, many layers, but we can and must do better. So I would say that. On the broader picture, just in terms of sort of a wrap up, I'm a huge proponent of connectivity. And not just connectivity, but I'll pull in another word, the I word, intersectionality. We need to create connections that are, this is going to sound like a plug too, because I got a podcast named this, that are unlikely intersections. We have to do that if we really want to advance the ball on health and wellness and make things better. We have got to create unlikely intersections where people who in our town, in our county, in our region of the state, begin to come in contact in ways that they wouldn't otherwise based on the historic patterns that we have set. It is only once that's done that we'll really be able to see marked improvement in health for anybody. Otherwise, we are stuck. Because the truth of it is, again, we're all one people. It is the human race. And we've got to start understanding what that means and acting like it, or you're just going to continue to see health outcomes in America decline, and we'll be no exception because we're already in the lower half of America anyway. So that's going to go faster. We have to understand the connectedness. We have to understand the intersections, and we have to help each other.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. And so I appreciate every single one of you, all of y'all face, are in a special place in my heart, especially those I called last minute. And since I tried to call you, I called you in January, we just couldn't get up. But I appreciate everybody. One of the reason this topic was so important was because we have a lot of resiliency task force. We have a lot of individuals talking about trauma, but are we dealing with it? Or like, are we having the conversations within our own community or within ours, for ourselves? Everybody, every family has been impacted by trauma in some way or form. Did you brush it off or did you deal with the situation? I can say in many families that I know, my own, communication is lacking. So, but we're taught to necessarily not talk about it. And that leaves that festering of life. And so thank you all for contributing to this conversation. These conversations and these panel discussions are only a starting point. So anyone out there who is watching or viewing or will view later, please continue the conversations in your various domains outside in the community, on your podcast, when you invite all of us to come. Thank you so much. I'm glad for the invite. All right.
We're ready. Yeah, we're ready.
I wrote it down, connection to intersectionality, intersectionality. I don't mispronounce it, but I appreciate you all and thank you.
Thank you again to our panelists. Let's give them a round of applause. Truly, this has been an inspiring and enriching dialogue. I would like to mention and thank Councilman Spears, who is here tonight, the city staff, Ms. Penelope Spicer Sidbury, and all of the commission members, Willie Black, Raymond Davis, Kamika Sidbury, Atiba Johnson, Shakima Clinton Quintana, Sierra Washington, and LaShonda Teague. Oh, let me not forget myself, Evelyn Adger. So please join us and follow us on the city's website for our next community event in May on housing gentrification, as we continue our series on the Emancipation Proclamation. Thank you again for those of you who are here tonight and those of you who are watching and support our city's Commission on African American History. Until the next time, have a good night.